Hello, everyone. Today we're going to read a very nice story of Evgenia Krasnova, whoever she is. And when I was preparing to read this chapter, I absolutely liked this gorgeous story. I hope you will be delighted to hear this too. And as I said in my mm, mm, as I said in my invitation to this today's stream. I think I mentioned that I would be reading chapter 2 and a piece of chapter 3, some extract from chapter 3, just because chapter 2 is too short. That's why I took something more, yeah, so that we don't read just for 10 minutes today, but a bit more. As usual, I try to do 20 or 30 minutes, yeah, and I think this is the optimal time because uh, nobody gets tired, including me, because but it's not only about me, yeah, it's also about the audience because it's really hard to take in information during an hour and even 40 minutes. As usual, I I remind you that I have a Discord server and you're welcome to get there and to discuss some ideas, maybe with me and some other participants if they come. Yeah. So I hope you will like today's episode. Yeah. Okay, so let us get started. Here's my book. Chapter 2. Evgenia's Black Swan. Pink glasses and success. How Eugenia stops marrying philosophers. I told you so. 5 years ago, Evgenia Nikolaevna Krasnova was an obscure and unpublished novelist with an unusual background. She was a neuroscientist with an interest in philosophy. Her first three husbands has been philosophers, and she got it into her stubborn Franco-Russian head to express her research and ideas in literary form. She dressed up her theories and stories and mixed them with all manner of autobiographical commentary. She avoided the journalistic prevarications of contemporary narrative nonfiction. On a clear April morning, John Smith left his house. Foreign dialogue was always written in the original language, with translation appended like movie subtitles. She refused to dub into bad English conversations that took place in bad Italian. Her third husband was an Italian philosopher. No publisher would have given her the time of day, except that there was, at the time, some interest in those rare scientists who could manage to express themselves in semi-understandable sentences. A few publishers agreed to speak with her. They hoped that she would grow up and write a popular science book on consciousness. She received enough attention to get the courtesy of rejection letters and occasional insulting comments instead of the far more insulting and demeaning silence. Publishers were confused by her manuscript. She could not even answer their first question: is this fiction or non-fiction? Nor could she respond to the "who is this book written for?" on the publisher's book proposal forms. She was told, "You need to understand who your audience is, and amateurs write for themselves, professionals write for others." She was also told to conform to a precise genre because bookstores do not like to be confused and need to know where to place a book on the shelves. One editor protectively added, "This, my dear friend, will only sell 10 copies, including those bought by your ex-husbands and family members." She had attended a famous writing workshop 5 years earlier and came out nauseated. Writing well seemed to mean obeying arbitrary rules that had grown into gospel, with the confirmatory reinforcement of what we call experience. The writers she met were learning to retrofit what was deemed successful. They all tried to imitate stories that had appeared in the past issues of the New Yorker, not realizing that most of what is new, by definition, cannot be modeled on past issues of the New Yorker. Even the idea of a short story was a Me Too concept to Evgenia. The workshop instructor, gentle but firm in his delivery, told her that her case was utterly hopeless. Evgenia ended up posting the entire manuscript of her main book, A Story of Recursion, on the web. There it found a small audience, which included the shrewd owner of a small unknown publishing house, who wore pink-rimmed glasses and spoke primitive Russian, convinced that he was fluent. He offered to publish her, and agreed to her condition to keep her text completely unedited. He offered her a fraction of the standard royalty rate in return for her editorial structure. He had so little to lose. She accepted, since she had no choice. It took 5 years for Evgenia to graduate from egomaniac without anything to justify it, stubborn and difficult to deal with category, to persevering, resolute, painstaking, and fiercely independent. For her book slowly caught fire, becoming one of the great and strange successes of literary history, selling millions of copies and drawing so-called critical acclaim. The startup house has since become a big corporation with a polite receptionist to greet visitors as they enter the main office. Her book has been translated into 40 languages, even French. You see her picture everywhere. She is said to be a pioneer of something called the Concilian School. Publishers now have a theory that truck drivers who read books do not read books read for truck drivers, and hold that readers despise writers who pander to them. A scientific paper, it is now understood, can hide trivialities or irrelevance with equations and jargon. Conciliant prose, by exposing an idea in raw form, allows it to be judged by the public. Today, Eugenia has stopped marrying philosophers; they argue too much, and she hides from the press. In classrooms, literary scholars discuss the many clues indicating the inevitability of the new style. The distinction between fiction and non-fiction is considered too archaic to withstand the challenges of modern society. It was so evident that she needed to remedy the fragmentation between art and science. After the fact, her talent was so obvious. Many of the editors she later met blamed her for not coming to them, convinced that they would have immediately seen the merit in her work. In a few years, a literary scholar will write the essay From Kundera to Krasnova, showing how the seeds of her work can be found in Kundera, a precursor who mixed essay and meta-commentary. Evgenia never read Kundera, but did see the movie version of one of his books. There was no commentary in the movie. A prominent scholar will show how the influence of Gregory Bateson, who injected autobiographical scenes into his scholarly research papers, is visible on every page. Eugenia has never heard of Bateson. Eugenia's book is a black swan. Chapter 3: The Speculator and the Prostitute. On the critical difference between speculators and prostitutes, fairness, unfairness, and black swan. Theory of knowledge and professional incomes, how extremist stand is not the best place to visit, except perhaps if you are a winner. Eugenia's rise from the second baseman to superstar is possibly in one environment, which I call extremistan. To those readers who Googled Evgenia Krasnov, I am sorry to say that she is officially a fictional character. I will soon introduce a central distinction between the black swan generating province of Extremistan and the tame, quiet, and uneventful province of Mediocristan. The best, worst advice. When I play back in my mind all the advice people have given me, I see that only a couple of ideas have stuck with me for life. The rest has been mere words, and I am glad I did not heed most of it. Most consisted of recommendations such as be measured and reasonable in your statements, contradicting the black swan idea, since empirical reality is not measured, and its own version of reasonableness does not correspond to the conventional middle brow definition. To be genuinely empirical is to reflect reality as faithfully as possible. To be honorable implies not fearing the appearance and consequences of being outlandish. The next time someone pesters you with an unneeded advice, gently remind him of the fate of the monk whom Ivan the Terrible put to death for delivering uninvited and moralizing advice. It works as a short term cure. The most important piece of advice was in retrospect bad, but it was also paradoxically the most consequential as it pushed me deeper into the dynamics of the black swan. It came when I was 22, one February afternoon, in the corridor of a building at 34 100 Walnut Street in Philadelphia, where I lived. A second year Wharton student told me to get a profession that is scalable, that is, one in which you are not paid by the hour and thus subject to the limitations of the amount of your labor. It was a very simple way to discriminate among professions and, from that, to generalize a separation between types of uncertainty. And it led me to the major philosophical problem, the problem of induction, which is the technical name for the black swan. It allowed me to turn the black swan from a logical impasse into a needed to implement solution, and, as we will see in the next chapters, to ground it in the texture of empirical reality. How did career advice lead to such ideas about the nature of uncertainty? Some professions, such as dentists, consultants, or message professionals, cannot be scaled. There is a cap of the number of patients or clients you can see in a given period of time. If you're a prostitute, you work by the hour and are generally paid by the hour. Furthermore, your presence is, I assume, necessary for the service you provide. If you open a fancy restaurant, you will be at best steadily fill up the room, unless you franchise it. In these professions, no matter how highly paid, your income is subject to gravity. Your revenue depends on your continuous efforts more than on the quality of your decisions. Moreover, this kind of work is largely predictable. It will vary, but not to the point of making the income of a single day more significant than that of the rest of your life. In other words, it will not be black swan driven. Evgenia Nikolaevna would not have been able to cross the chasm between underdog and supreme hero overnight had she been a tax accountant or a hernia specialist, but she would not have been an underdog either. Other professions allow you to add zeros to your output and your income if you do well, at little or no extra effort. Now we're lazy, considering laziness as an asset, and eager to free up the maximum amount of time in my day to meditate and read, I immediately, but mistakenly, drew a conclusion. I separated the idea person who sells an intellectual product in the form of a transaction or a piece of work from the labor person who sells you his work. If you are an idea person, you do not have to work hard, only think intensely. You do the same work whether you produce 100 units of thousands. In quant trading, the same amount of work is involved in buying 100 shares as in buying 100,000, or even a million. It is the same phone call, the same computation, the same legal document, the same expenditure of brain cells, the same effort in verifying that the transaction is right. Furthermore, you can work from your bathtub or from a bar in Rome. You can use leverage as a replacement for work. Well, okay, I was a little wrong about trading. One cannot work from a bathtub, but when done right, the job allows considerable free time. The same property applies to recording artists or movie actors. You let the sound engineers and projectionists do the work. There is no need to show up at every performance in order to perform. Similarly, a writer expends the same effort to attract one single reader as she would to capture several hundred million. J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter books, does not have to write each book again every time someone wants to read it, but this is not so for a baker. He needs to bake every single piece of bread in order to satisfy each additional customer. So, the distinction between writer and baker, speculator and doctor, fraudster and prostitute is a helpful way to look at the world of activities. It separates those professions in which one can add zeros of income with no greater labor from those in which one needs to add labor and time, both of which are in limited supply. In other words, those subjected to gravity. Beware the scalable. But why was the advice from a fellow student bad? If the advice was helpful, and it was, in creating a classification for ranking uncertainty and knowledge, it was a mistake as far as choices of profession went. It might have paid off for me, but only because I was lucky I happened to be in the right place at the right time, as the saying goes. If I myself had to give advice, I would recommend someone pick a profession that is not scalable. A scalable profession is good only if you are successful. They are more competitive, produce monstrous inequalities, and are far more random, with huge disparities between efforts and rewards. A few can take a large share of the pie, leaving others out entirely at no fault of their own. One category of profession is driven by the mediocre, the average, and the middle of the road. In it, the mediocre is collectively consequential. The other has either giants or dwarfs, more precisely, a very small number of giants and a huge number of dwarfs. Let us see what is behind the formation of unexpected giants, the Black Swan formation. The advent of scalability. Consider the fate of Giacomo, an opera singer at the end of the 19th century, before sound recording was invented. Say he performs in a small and remote town in central Italy. He is shielded from those big egos at La Scala and Milan and other major opera houses. He feels safe as his vocal cords will always be in demand somewhere in the district. There is no way for him to export his singing, and there is no for the big guns to export theirs and threaten his local franchise. It is not yet possible for him to store his work, so his presence is needed at every performance, just as the barber is still needed today for every haircut. So the total pie is unevenly split, but only mildly so, much like the calories consumption. It is cut in a few pieces and everyone has a share. The big guns have larger audiences and get more invitations than the small guy. But this is not too worrisome. Inequalities exist, but let us call them mild. There is no scalability yet, no way to double the largest in-person audience without having to sing twice. Now, consider the effect of the first music recording, an invention that introduced a great deal of injustice. Our ability to reproduce and repeat performances allows me to listen on my laptop to hours of background music of the pianist Vladimir Horowitz, now extremely dead, performing Rachmaninoff's preludes instead of the local Russian emigre musician still living, who is now reduced to giving piano lessons to generally untalented children for close to minimum wage. Horowitz, though dead, is putting the poor man out of business. I would rather listen to Vladimir Horowitz or Arthur Rubinstein for $10.99 a CD then pay $9.99 for one by some unknown but very talented graduate of the Juilliard School or the Prague Conservatory. If you ask me why I select Horowitz, I will answer that it is because of the order, rhythm, or passion, when in fact there are probably a legion of people I have never heard about and will never hear about, those who did not make it to the stage but who might play just as well. Some people naively believe that the process of unfairness started with the gramophone, according to the logic that I just presented. I disagree. I am convinced that the process started much, much earlier with our DNA, which stores information about ourselves and allows us to repeat our performance without our being there by spreading our genes down the generations. Evolution is scalable. The DNA that wins, whether by luck or survival advantage, will reproduce itself like a best-selling book or a successful record and become pervasive. Other DNA will vanish. Just consider the difference between us humans, excluding financial economists and businessmen, and other living beings on our planet. Furthermore, I believe that the big transition in social life came not with the gramophone, but when someone had the great but unjust idea to invent the alphabet, thus allowing us to store information and reproduce it. It accelerated further when another inventor had the even more dangerous and iniquitous notion of starting a printing press, thus promoting text across boundaries and triggering what ultimately grew into a winner take all ecology. Now, what was so unjust about the spread of books? The alphabet allowed stories and ideas to be replicated with high fidelity and without limit, without any additional expenditure of energy on the author's part for the subsequent performances. He didn't even have to be alive for them. Death is often a good career move for an author. This implies that those who, for some reason, start getting some attention can quickly reach more minds than others and displace the competitors from the bookshelves. In the days of bards and troubadours, everyone had an audience. A storyteller, like a baker or a coppersmith, had a market, and the assurance that none from far away could dislodge him from his territory. Today, a few take almost everything, the rest next to nothing. By the same mechanism, the advent of the cinema displaced neighborhood actors, putting the small guys out of business. But there is a difference. In pursuits that have a technical component, like being a pianist or a brain surgeon, talent is easy to ascertain, with subjective opinion playing a relatively small part. The inequity comes from someone perceived as being marginally better gets the whole pie. In the arts, say the cinema, things are far more vicious. What we call talent generally comes from success rather than its opposite. A great deal of empiricism has been done on the subject, most notably by Art Devaney, an insightful and original thinker who single-mindedly studied violent uncertainty in the movies. He showed that sadly, much of what we ascribe to skills is an after-the-fact attribution. The movie makes the actor, he claims, and the large dose of nonlinear luck makes the movie. The success of movies depends severely on contagions. Such contagions do not just apply to the movies, they seem to affect a wide range of cultural products. It is hard for us to accept that movies do not fall in love with work of art only for their own, that people do not fall in love with works of art for their own sake, but also in order to feel that they belong to a community. By imitating, we get closer to others, that is, other imitators. It fights solitude. This discussion shows the difficulty in predicting outcomes in an environment of concentrated success. So, for now, let us note that the division between professionals can be used to understand the division between types of random variables. Let us go further into the issue of knowledge, of inference about the unknown and the properties of the known. So I think that's enough for today. We're going to read the left part of the chapter next time. I'm not sure. Yeah. Next time is going to be exactly next Sunday. So I sincerely advise you to come, and naturally, mm, I invite you to my Discord server. Yeah. So I'm checking whether there are uh, any people, and well, I wish you a good Sunday, a good weekend, and see you next time then.